Hey, how's it going, guys? I'm Chris and this is Regular Guy Training. Now, before I get started on this video, I'm going to take a couple of seconds to let you guys know, as far as our training schedule is concerned, we're operating business as usual, okay? It's going to be the same. I'm going to come out to where I have classes scheduled. As far as that front is concerned, I'm just going to keep going, right? Now, in the event that something happens and I have to cancel, right, because of just outside elements fucking with us, right, I'll contact everybody on my roster and I'll make sure that, okay, I plan on moving this to the right on the calendar, right, that means forward on the calendar, to a date far enough away to where everyone can get resituated and rescheduled and all that other stuff. I understand a lot of people are dealing with a lot of crap right now, but for those of you that are coming out and training and that kind of stuff and doing what you got to do, I'm going to come out and I'm going to continue doing what I need to do for the guys that are coming out to do what they need to do as well. Does that make sense? For those of you that foresee some bullshittery happening and you want to reschedule or transfer your roster slot to a class later on down the line, right? Like you don't want to wait, you just want to transfer that. Across the board, I'm totally down with that. We'll work with each other and we'll make all that stuff happen. Does that make sense? Because as much as I'm dependent on you to keep going as a business, I have to work with you, right? Yes, I have a refund policy in place, and yes, it's super strict. But given the current circumstances, I'm going to loosen up just a little bit so that we can work with each other. Does that make sense? So, far as, you know, transfers and all that stuff, we can just head that off right now. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about this. Now, I'm going to come right out and say this handgun has been absolutely amazing, okay? As far as just previous performances and how it handles when it tries to jump around in the hand and that kind of stuff. Jump around really is a relative term because it isn't trying to do that in a base configuration, let alone like so. You know, how accurate it is, how fast you can be with it. This thing has been awesome, okay? For the longest time, my default answer to a lot of people that are just kind of like, hey, I'm looking for a concealed carry handgun, here's my body type, my default answer was always a Glock 19 or a 17. You know, if you're a bigger dude, or if you can handle, or if you can, you know, conceal full-size guns like I can with my particular body type and how stuff hides in my belt line, okay, cool, 19 or a 17. Although, like for a while, and still, I was pushing more towards a 17 camp, mostly because if you can carry it, right? And it's not like the light changes its length, you know, if you're carrying a gun light. So that was the default answer for the longest time. As I said in the previous video, for me personally, this is taking over as far as my primary everyday carry gun. And that's solidified itself even more over time, right? And here's why, right? I've noticed as far as just how it performs in classes, how it performs when I'm doing demos, and like for instance, over the course of a 4-day set where I'm teaching pistol 1 and 2, I'll shoot like 1,000 rounds of handgun, okay? For those of you that pay attention to the schedule, that's a lot of courses that I end up coming out and shooting 1,000 rounds in 4 days. Plus there's the individual training that I do, which if I'm trying to push the envelope and I'm getting mad at myself, I'll push like 500-600 rounds in a day, right? So since the last review, I waited a lot and I didn't shoot this very much because I wanted this to get sent to primary machine, and then I wanted to shoot it as much as possible once all of this stuff was fixed up. Now, I'm going to do a separate video on the compensator, working with a compensator and a dot and a light and all that stuff, and that's more of a utility-based thing where we talk about advantages and disadvantages possibly and all that other crap. But what I am going to talk about is what I changed on this particular handgun, because it does change up a bunch of things as far as how the slide tracks and all that other stuff, right? Now, as far as the frame is concerned, the only thing that I changed internally was the slide lock lever. On the right-hand side, I cut the thing off, because I noticed that as time went on and as I got more aggressive with the handgun, you can see where my hand posture is on it right now, it would fail to lock to the rear on the slide. Now, I recognize that that's my particular technique because I don't grip with like my hand strength, I don't squeeze on the handgun, I vice the handgun in place, which a lot of guys will sit there and make fun of, like my tack bows and that kind of stuff in videos, but I use basically the entire arm, including leverage I can build off from the shoulders, rolled back a bit to leverage itself into the gun. It helps keep everything track really flat. The con to that is if you have a slide lock lever that is super duper flush or jutted out slightly, like for instance with a Gen 5 Glock 19, it makes it very difficult to get the slide to lock to the rear, and I didn't want to compromise how aggressive my grip is on a handgun, because who doesn't want a flat shooting handgun? I don't care what caliber it is. So I decided that I was going to cut the thing off. Now, you're going to ask me, okay, so if that's the case, how are you dropping the slide to the rear on it? As I said in the previous review, this thing has a slide auto drop feature. So similar to the M&P 1.0, if you insert that magazine more or less with this sort of angle to it and give it a little bit of it will auto drop itself. So I noticed that I didn't have to press a slide lock lever or anything like that, so I could just kind of get into it, and once I got into it, it did everything that it was supposed to just fine. No big deal there, right? So as far as all that is concerned, I didn't have to mess with a slide lock lever and that kind of stuff, and I didn't have to compromise my grip at all. I can get as aggressive as I wanted to, get the gun to track as flat as I needed to, and all I really had to do was take a Dremel to it and couple of minutes and figuring out how the internals come out, because it is more complex than a Glock 19. I'll get to that. Yeah, it was really no big deal after that. Now, as far as performance is concerned, I got this back as it is. Well, no, let's talk about what I actually changed up front first, or up top first. The slide is where all the work went in, and for some of you that's pretty obvious. I went to Primary Machine, and I decided that I was going to go ahead and get it cut for this particular optic, which is an RMR footprint. Whether or not they used RMR screws or depthed the screw holes in here for the screws that are sent from Holosun, I am unaware of at the moment. What I am going to do is I'm likely to take this off, put a Type 2 RMR on it, and see how that goes, just to see if the screw depth is in fact that deep. We'll see how that goes. So we deleted a big long section out of the slide here, cut in a dovetail for suppressor height Glock rear, installed the suppressor height P10C front, and we're good to go. Now, the reason why I particularly chose the irons up front is actually twofold. Number one, this is my primary sighting system, so I want it. I don't want to pay attention to picking up a set of rear iron sights first, mostly because I've shot stock handguns for the most part since like always, right? And especially like a carry handgun. It was a Glock 19 with a set of irons on it, grip stippling and a light, done, right? So I wanted to acquire this first. The second thing is having the extra material just get moved away from here allows me to get in on the slide, really sandwich in behind that optic, and then I can run it without having to mess with the optic itself, unless I was using one-handed manipulations and had to beat it off of something in order to get it to cycle. It allows me to not have to depend on how tough those screws are to cycle the action manually. Now, I recognize when the gun is fired, it's cycling much harder than I could yank on it and that kind of stuff, but I don't want to add more to it, if that makes any sense. So I chose the irons forward, and when I'm using the dot itself, honestly, most of the time I don't even notice that the irons are there. That was the whole point, right? And I'll talk about how I'm using this optic in a later video. I also decided to get their threaded barrel and compensator. I decided I was going to match up black with the gold. That just aesthetics. That's what it is. But the threaded barrel in here. What's actually really cool as far as like quality of life is concerned is that it's not just a threaded barrel. You can tell that they did as much as possible, like the beginnings of a target crown on this threaded barrel, as much as they could. Now, a lot of people will hear that and be like, how in the fuck is that even possible? It is. It's very subtle. It's there. And it's actually kind of nice, because a lot of times you just don't see that in threaded barrels or pistol barrels at all, for the most part, unless you're going for some sort of match grade barrel or whatever sold by an aftermarket company. And then it mates up very, very nice with very, very little room between the slide and the compensator, which is good. Like, I don't want them contacting each other, but I don't also want this thing fucking hanging out there for no reason at all. So, you know, that is what it is. I went with a standard stealth compensator versus their micro or short or whatever they call it, mostly because there's separation between the top ports and the side ports versus the top port being connected with the side ports as far as structural longevity is concerned. They may have a different opinion on this, obviously, because they sell it, duh, but as far as structural integrity is concerned, over large volumes of fire over long periods of time, I just feel like this would be a tougher option to go with. I went with that. So, and there's a particular method that I use to install this because I don't fully disassemble this anymore. This is one unit. I clean it as is. I don't fuck around with it. And there's all that. There's more I can get into, but I'll hold right there. So all the work was done in the slide. Now, when you add a compensator to a handgun, the first question, and when you cut it for an optic and that kind of stuff, the first thing that a lot of people are going to start thinking about is, well, what happens with A, mass distribution on the handgun? Is there enough weight for it to adequately cycle? And 2, when this starts activating on handgun ammunition, especially the weakest stuff, which is like 115 target ammo, like you got your Tulas and your reloaded bunny fart ammunition, and you know, your Winchester Forge, which is ass across the board with whatever handgun you use. So people are going to ask, it's like, okay, how does it cycle on that with a stock recoil spring versus one that's lightened up, right? With this particular package from this particular compensator, I'm happy to report that while I can't say that it performs exactly like a stock handgun with target ammunition, it performs pretty damn close. For instance, in those 4 days that I fire, you know, 1,000 rounds worth of demos, or in my own training and that kind of stuff, really, like, and especially in the individual training sessions, we get really hard on the guns. We push them as hard as we can, that kind of stuff, because, you know, I'm not here to feel comfortable when I train. But in that, I expected way more stoppages out of 115 grain ammunition, target ammunition, than I actually got. And what I got was just a couple more on average than I would with a stock handgun. You know, and obviously that increased the dirtier this thing got. I shot this thing to about 5,000 rounds without cleaning it at all, and it was at that point where the gun was getting so gunked up where I was starting to get noticeable stovepipes, right? But that's every handgun, right? So if I'm getting a noticeable number of stovepipes at the same rate that I would any other handgun, especially, guys, we're also outside. It's soupy a lot outside. We've had good weather so far, in like the last 3 or 4 classes I've done, but it's still going in the dirt. The dirt gets turned into soup when it rains hard. Fall in Tennessee means it's wet all the time, right? And winter also. We get like a day of snow a year. So with magazines going into all kinds of garbage, while at the same time being shot a lot, not being clean, that kind of stuff, it performed very well. Next question, how does it perform with defense ammunition? Well, the cool thing is that 115 grain ammunition, target ammo, barely activates the compensator because that's not what the compensator was designed for. It was designed for powdered up defense or competition loads that they're trying to get their power factor, right? So they powder them up a little bit more. You're trying to smack those plates and make sure they go down, that kind of shit. And with this mounted to it, all the defense ammo that we shot, even a little bit of plus P plus that I shot, it was like 100 rounds total over the course of this handgun's life, within this configuration, rather. While I noticed it a little more in the wrist because of tire pressure stuff, duh, the gun cycled as flat as it does with target ammunition, and that's specifically due to the compensator. There's more on that, but that's a completely different video, right? So with defense ammunition, 0 issues across the board, and out of the 7-ish thousand rounds that I fired through this, because it's been a little bit more since the last of that footage was shot, but over the course of the 7-ish thousand rounds that I fired through it, like a little more than 7,000 rounds, right? I fired something like 800 rounds of defense ammunition through this in total. 0 issues across the board with defense ammunition, and that's really what you need out of a carry handgun in the first place, because yes, I carry this everywhere. Yes, I know it's Glock 34 length. Yes, I'll cover that later in a video. But its whole job is to shoot defense ammo at dudes, because this is a freaking self-defense handgun, right? So if it's a whole bunch of that crap at varying pressures and grains and I have no issues, I'm thoroughly down with that. Especially since the second you add this and cut this and move that, you're really dicking with how the slide tracks on the handgun itself. So I'm happy with how this thing has performed overall. Now, as far as the rest of it is concerned, as far as wearing a handgun and that kind of stuff, as far as other things I've noticed, let's talk about this, because I can't just sit here and suck this handgun's dick the entire time. The people who designed this handgun have made some baffling choices to me, because in order to cut the slide lock lever off of this side of the handgun, I had to disassemble portions of the lower. Why it is that we decided that we were going to use spring pins or roll pins, whatever terminology you want to use, versus captured pins, like the one that's in here already. Why you decided to use spring pins for the rest of this handgun makes no sense to me whatsoever, at all. And in early iterations of this handgun, there were reports of this one in particular, I believe, but one of these roll pins just working loose for no reason. And that's the problem with spring pins, is that eventually, especially through repeated abuse and use and that kind of stuff, they'll eventually try to walk on you. Worse than that, when you drive one out, it's one and done. You need to replace it because its initial fit is the tightest fit it's ever going to have. When you punch it out and allow it to do this, it will not maintain the same amount of tension that it did when it went in the first time. So you got to replace them, or eventually they're going to walk out. That's annoying as hell. You know, why it is that was put in the handgun, I don't understand. And me personally, I would very much appreciate later iterations of the handgun just getting rid of that and going to captured pins, or not captured pins, but I'm forgetting the terminology right now, but pins that are held in by the springs of the handgun itself. For instance, like a Glock 19 that I can completely strip down to bare frame with an Allen key, and it goes back together properly. Does that make sense? That just makes everything that I have to do on this handgun easier. So what's worse than all of that is that now I have to replace that individual spring pin to make sure that I have the proper tension on the pin to hold all the components in place when I drive this fucker out and service it the way I need to service it. Now, is this a game-ending thing? No. A lot of handguns do this, and I thoroughly understand that. But it's been done a million times. Everything that you need to contain all that crap is already contained once you have a back plate in place that you can remove and that kind of crap. Does that make sense? So it's just a quality of life improvement that I can personally see, because it makes things easier to just service the handgun without having to replace things outside of what I'm already trying to replace. Does that make any sense? So as far as that whole thing is concerned, I'm not saying that I'm done with the handgun over these things. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is it's a little annoying, you know. But you take the good with the bad, I suppose. Now, all of that said, I mean, I've had no thoughts of replacing a trigger in this thing. To be honest, as far as striker fire handguns is concerned, I know that there's better triggers that exist. I'm not going to sit here and say that that's not a thing. What I am saying is that this trigger regularly spoils me, because it's really easy to do very well with this trigger for long periods of time. And as I said in the original video, it's nothing more, really, than a shorter resetting, smoother, slightly less sloppy Glock trigger. But it turns out a lot of people will go to the Ghost 3.5 pound disconnectors external to a factory Glock for exactly that. You know, even though they don't get shorter reset and shorter break after you wall up and that kind of stuff. Walling up means you get through the slack in the trigger, and then the second it starts to stack weight, how far does that travel before it breaks, right? You don't get, it doesn't get better with the disconnector, it's just less sloppy. I get both straight out the factory with this handgun. So, final, well, I can't say final thoughts because there's probably going to be a third video on this after we irretrievably break it. Right now, I'm finding it harder and harder and harder to justify a Glock 19 as a primary carry handgun for a lot of different people. I don't know why this handgun isn't more popular than it is. And yeah, somebody's going to imright.com because Glock is the best, and they're going to find instances where these handguns have broken and that kind of stuff. But I'm pretty certain that I've seen a lot of Glocks go down in goofy ways, just from the number of them that exist. Does that make sense? But as far as what I've seen out of this handgun, as far as what I've seen my students do with their P10Cs, I'm very confident that this isn't a one-off. I'm very confident that this handgun, it's got the legs, feet, and rest of it, right? Bad analogy. It's got staying power. It's gonna be here a while, and if CZ commits to making little additional improvements as far as just ease of serviceability and that kind of crap, man, this handgun's gonna be around for a long time, and it's gonna be a really serious competitor, right? Because as many people have figured out, when they start using these longer term, they start running out of reasons to carry their Glock 19s. And that's where I'm at on this particular handgun. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm going to sell all of my Glocks, because to be in the industry that I am and to teach the people that I do, not having Glocks is dumb as shit. But if your job isn't my job, I would seriously debate it. Now, if you want to train with us, I already let off with all the stuff that I needed to say about this. You know, do what you got to do. I understand. But if you want to train with us, absolutely can. Our website is there. Our Facebook page is there. If you want to support us through Patreon, because those of you that have continued to hang with us as far as the Patreon thing throughout this bullshit, I can't put into words how appreciative I am for not having just a gigantic slew of people that drop off the rock the instant that this thing kind of hit, because I'm depending, obviously like any other small business, on you guys to keep my lights on, right? My students that have come through that haven't cut their $41 a month, program fees. My guys that continue to support us throughout all of this crap. The guys that continue to schedule to train with us. I can't put into words how lucky I am that you guys are even around. Because you don't have to do that. You don't have to support anything that we do. But I'm really glad that you guys have stuck around over time. And with that said, remember guys, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy.